All right, it's James Keddington here. I am excited to do episode number 5 of the Overcome and Become podcast. All right, so here we are, and my name is James Keddington, and I'm going to kind of start over for those on the live stream here. I didn't get a start on my audio recording, so there's an outtake for you, but we're live, so we don't get to stop on that. So we're just going to give it one more go. And I'm going to adjust this camera here just a little bit to be a little bit more head on. Fantastic. Just the lighting. Oh, that's great. Love it. All right. Okay. So here we are. Alrighty. Okay. Let's get started with this, shall we? All right. I'm going to get started on the recording here, and we will get going. All right. So James Keddington here. I'm excited to do episode number 5 of the Overcome and Become podcast. Today, we are discussing building emotional resilience, and specifically 3 steps to curb inaccurate thinking patterns. So our thoughts influence our emotions, and we all become subjected to inaccurate thinking patterns. As a result, we create unhealthy responses or frameworks for approaching relationships, goals, and life's challenges. One of the most effective ways to build emotional resilience is to, 1, identify what our inaccurate thinking patterns are, 2, what triggers them, and 3, how to reframe our mindsets to create accurate thinking patterns. So let's identify some of the more popular inaccurate thinking patterns that warp our sense of reality. There are dozens of them, but I'm just going to address 5 of the more popular ones. So thinking pattern number 1, it's all or nothing. This is where we say never or always in response to individual actions that lead to adverse situations. Let me give an example. I was officiating a water polo game a few months ago, and my partner, who was pretty young, in their first year of college, still developing, in maturity and whatnot. So this is not a slam on that person. But this person, she was flirting with one of a person on deck, and they were talking. And then the flirtation talk went to gossiping about other people. And she was complaining about a coach that was on one of the teams that we were officiating against. And she started talking bad about this coach. And she did not realize that the coach's wife was right there. And the coach's wife got very upset about it. And after this whole thing was over, she's like, I always do this. I always screw up. I'm always doing this. And this young woman, who I think is an amazing person, she just kind of lost it emotionally, thinking that I'm always doing these types of things. And it became this very big situation where she could never do anything right. And that's an example of an all or nothing mindset, where we do something that leads to an outcome that we don't want, which we all do. We all say stupid things. We all make a mistake. We all accidentally put our foot in our mouth. And her specific response was so dramatic, so overwhelming, and it shut her down for the rest of the evening, where she really wasn't that functional. And so that type of mindset really establishes a pattern for how we view ourselves in all situations like that, right? So that's thinking pattern number 1. So it can either be I'm always doing this, or I'm never doing that, or I can never get this right. Okay. So thinking pattern number 2, mislabeling something. This is where we take an experience and we create a label about it that forms our identity. Okay. So I'll give you an example from my personal lifestyle. When I was young, I went to use my sister's 10-speed bike, and she got pretty mad at me about this. And she said something to the effect of, you always break things. Now, I was probably 10 or 12 years old, and that was probably true, that I probably, anytime I took something of hers or my older brother's, I probably did break it, right? I mean, I was 10 at the time. And she was justified in saying that to me. But as a young person, not knowing how to process that and not being able to see that objectively for who I was as a 10-year-old and for who she was as a 14-year-old girl. Maybe we were even younger, because I don't think she was 14 years old. I think she was younger than that. And so, but not able to objectively process that type of situation, I took that as, oh, this is who I am. I am the kind of person that breaks things, right? And I carried that label with me for a very long time. And oftentimes we do that. So the other things that we do are, I am incapable of having a good relationship. I'm broken, right? So maybe you have failed relationships and you're thinking, I'm broken. I've heard a lot of people say that. So we don't want to create labels from experiences. We all, especially when we're learning and growing and developing, we're all going to not do things right. And so to create a label out of that, right? Oftentimes these labels are given to us by parents or older people, father figures, mother figures, people in forms of responsibility, where they say, you are not bright. If you were only smarter, you would have not done it that way. And so oftentimes we can take these mislabeling and we can project it onto other people, especially young people in our stewardship. So we don't want to create thinking patterns in other people by how we talk to them as well. And so instead, we need to identify things like, oh, I broke this. I was learning. What will I do differently next time? And we're going to get into how to change these thinking patterns in a moment. The next one is personalizing. Personalizing means we place blame or fault on us or other people, when in reality, there are multiple factors involved in the situation. So let's give an example of personalizing something, okay? So I sent this is just an example. Let's pretend I am crafting an email to follow up on a conversation to someone I spoke about on coaching, right? And I send the email out and I don't get a response back from them. And a day goes by, okay, whatever, 2 days go by, 3 days, 5, a week goes by, I'm like, man, they hate me. They don't like me. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough, right? And I'm thinking about all of this stuff and all the ways that, okay, this is never going to work out. When in reality, what could have happened? Now, this is a similar situation, because something, not this exact situation happened, but something similar. They got busy with work. They had a family emergency one day. A child got sick. They were traveling a lot, maybe on vacation, out of cell reception. And on day 12, they said, hey, James, I'm sorry. I've been out of pocket for a week. I had a lot going on to prepare for vacation. I had a lot to catch up when I got back. Can we meet tomorrow? Whoa. Okay. So now we see that there's a lot of things that went into them not responding to me, and it had nothing to do with me, right? So that's an example of how we personalize a situation, place a blame or a fault or on us or something else, right? When in reality, it had nothing to do with us at all. And I think that this is a really, really common inaccurate thinking pattern where, oh, they're doing this, it's because I am like this. When in reality, like, they weren't even thinking about you when they made that comment, or when they didn't do something or didn't invite you to a party or whatnot. Okay. All right. So that's the thinking pattern number 3. The fourth common thinking pattern that's inaccurate is a negative mental filter. And you're going to notice that a lot of these common thinking patterns may look like they cross over in some areas or are very similar. And it's true, because they're all negative, right? They're all inaccurate. So the negative mental filter, this is like when the glass is a half empty situation and we fail to see the positive aspects in our days. So here's an example, okay? I wake up in the morning and I get up on time. I don't have to hit the snooze 10 times to wake up. I just get up, I shower, I listen to some good songs, I get to work, I have a great meeting with some coworkers, we accomplish some things, and then On the way home from lunch, I get in a fender bender and someone rear ends me. And nothing major, no damage. It just kind of disrupts my commute a little bit or the way back to work. But now I'm just like, oh my gosh, my day sucks. And now I get to work and my boss is like, hey, James, can we talk? I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to give me some bad news. He's probably going to cut my budget and I'm not going to be able to do these projects now. And now I'm starting to see like one thing happened, and now all the great stuff that happened earlier in the day and all the potential great stuff that's about to happen is erased because we take one moment and we let that negative filter shape the way we see the rest of the world that day or that week or that month or for a very long time, right? Something bad happens like, oh, I'm that person with the rain cloud over my head always. And we don't see that, wow, someone like complimented me. I don't even hear it because I'm so focused on the negative that I didn't hear a compliment like, oh man, you're such a ray of sunshine in my life. Oh yeah, whatever. She's probably just saying that to make me feel good because she doesn't like my shirt I'm wearing today, right? So the negative mental filter blocks out all the positive and only allows us to see the negative things. This is especially true when I'm going to talk about this in a future podcast, but when we do what's called emotional stacking, like think about a young person or even an adult person in an athletic game where you say, how did your game go? Oh, well, I missed this shot and I didn't get this pass and then I did this. But they're not talking about the goals that they did make or the great passes they made or the awareness that they had, right? So this is where we kind of negative mental filter stack the negative experiences and don't make room for us to think about the positive ones. And so, all right, let's talk about the next one, magnification, okay? This kind of builds on all of the other ones. Magnification is where we exaggerate negative and positive experiences too, right? So it can be like, oh my gosh, like my day is so crazy and I just can't get anything done. And as a result, I'm just overwhelmed and now I'm just unable to focus. Well, maybe your day's busy, but it's maybe not that busy. Or it's like, oh my gosh, all this great stuff's happening. I don't have time to respond to my emails. I don't have time for this or that because I've got all this great stuff happening, but then you stop seeing things, you're unable to be present. So magnification is that big exaggeration of positive or negative. All right. So now that we've kind of identified some of these inaccurate thinking patterns, what they are, it's important to realize that identifying inaccurate thinking patterns is an ongoing effort. Once you identify one and recognize it, you begin to realize that there's probably lots of layers to those thinking patterns. Oftentimes, these are affiliated with maybe some trauma or negative experiences we had as young people, or even positive experiences we had from people who are reflecting or behaving through their own inaccurate thinking patterns. But because we were young and idolized that person, we thought, well, if they do it that way, it must be good, right? So I had a conversation with a young man about, he was a new father, and he's like, I've got to be this way, and this way, and this way, and I can't be soft on my kids. I got to be hard on them, and I got to make them tough. And I'm like, what about kind? He's like, oh, kind's for the mom. And I'm like, wow, like where did he learn that? Right? That's an inaccurate thinking pattern. Like dads are allowed to be kind. Dads are allowed to be soft and tender and emotional with their children. But somewhere along the line, someone we idolize teaches us otherwise, right? So sometimes there's lots of layers. And then also we realize there's other inaccurate thinking patterns that when compared to the ones we just got rid of aren't so bad, but they're still inaccurate, right? So it's a long process to identify these, and it takes a lot of work, and that's okay. That's part of growing and development and making ourselves better and improving relationships is that ongoing effort. Okay, so once you've identified them, it's time to understand what triggers them. And what triggers these patterns is different for all of us. We're all going to have different triggers. So I can't tell you in this podcast, here's what to look out for. But what I can do is that I can offer you a set of questions that you can ask yourself and help you discover your triggers for your inaccurate thinking patterns. So here's question number one. What moods do you struggle with the most? Like, do you struggle with being tired? Do you struggle with stress? Do you struggle with being hungry, too happy, right? Do you struggle with other people's happiness? Do you struggle with being let down, disappointment, right? Of course, we all struggle with some of those things to a degree, but how well do we respond to those, right? Next one is, are there weeks or days in the week or seasons or holidays or special events that are hard for you? One for me is, so one of my negative thinking patterns is people won't accept me, right? Just not knowing me, right? So when I go to events where there's going to be networking, like I did this week, I start to get stressed, right? So that's an example of like a special event that are hard for me because on the build up, I'm starting to get uneasy because I'm like developing a little bit of anxiety. Now I'm learning how to bypass those. And like the event I went to this week, it was fantastic, right? It didn't mean that it was easy for me. There were some moments that were hard where I had to really kind of take some deep breaths and some solitude and regain my composure and settle my anxiety a little bit. But I did it, right? And so ask yourself, are there seasons? Maybe it's like family get-togethers where maybe there's family members who bring out the worst in you, but you still go because there's family members who also bring out the best in you, right? So ask yourself, are there days of the week, seasons, holidays that are hard for you? All right. Are there personality types that activate stress, anger, anxiety, or any other slew of emotions that you don't like? So there's a lot of type A personalities out there. Some type A personalities are very kind and compassionate. And some type A personalities kind of like have like a lawnmower effect where they just run people over. And a lot of people are okay with that. They understand, oh, it's not about me. It's just how they are. And they get a lot of stuff done. And I like working with that person. And they're movers and shakers. And I'm like that too. And so we work really well together. And some people are very passive aggressive. And so when they're paired with someone who's kind of like a bulldozer, it creates stressful situations. And you know, we learn to value the differences and we learn to value the strengths that each person brings. But that doesn't mean that sometimes we start to develop inaccurate thinking patterns about how we do around those people or what we're capable of around people who are difficult for us, right? And those personality types was just an example. There's many other personality types. That was just an example. So identify, are there people that I just struggle to be around, right? Here's another question. So it was a fourth question. What situations are most difficult for you? So is it being around family? Is it large groups? Is it small groups? Is it people who are new? Is it people who are young? Is it people who are old, right? So are there situations like learning a new skill or being around my boss or being at a concert, right? Where it's loud noise or where it's too quiet, right? Too quiet, right? So are there situations that are difficult? Here's another one. Are there patterns to regretful situations from your past? So you may have in your past realized that your negative or inaccurate thinking patterns have led you to respond consistently in ways that you're not proud of or not happy about. And so when you anticipate those situations coming up, it now triggers a different kind of reaction out of fear, right? So are you seeing those where, okay, I don't want to behave like that again, and now you get worried and now you behave in another way that you're not happy about? All right. Are there frameworks of thinking that seem to dominate others? So I talked about earlier my fear of rejection, right? That dominates other patterns. Okay. So are there frameworks or inaccurate thinking patterns that's just like, I'm always thinking, what if I'm not enough, right? And we all have like these voices in our head. So what voices in your head dominate the others that don't make you feel good about yourself, right? So thoughtful and honest answers to these questions will reveal potential thinking patterns that are harmful to your mental and emotional health. Okay, let's move on to the final step of correcting false thinking patterns. And this is reframing our mindset to generate accurate thinking patterns. And reframing is a process all by itself. And I want to know that sources to many of these thought patterns are rooted in misinformation, making adjusting from them quite easy, while others are deeply anchored by trauma, requiring a lot more effort and time to adequately correct. So, for example, something in misinformation might be, um, let me just throw something out like, all dogs bite people. So when you see a dog, like, oh, I got to stay away from that dog, right? So that would be some of the misinformation, right? While others would be like repeated, maybe abuse of like, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're too fat, you're too fat, you're too fat, or whatever people saying that to over and over again. Those things are going to take a long time to overcome. Okay. All right. So regardless of how these thinking patterns came to be, the process for changing is the same. The length of time may be different, but the process is the same. So, one, come to understand the impact these thinking patterns have on your relationships, productivity, and or happiness. So, as I identify these thinking patterns, maybe it's the all or nothing. I'm always like this. I'm always doing this. I'm so I can never do this right. So, what is the impact of that on my relationship? Maybe it's I'm exhausting people and I'm a drain on their energy. Well, once I understand that that pattern is a drain on others people's energy and they don't want to be around me, I don't want that outcome. I can ask myself, do I want to drain other people's energy? Do I want to take away from that? Do I want people to see me and be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such an exhausting drama filled day? No, we don't want people to feel that way. So now by doing this and we can understand the impact, we can develop a why, like a good reason to changing this thinking pattern. So the second step is dissect the reality of the thought pattern. How did it come to be? When did I start feeling this way? Is there any truth to it, right? If so, what is the truth behind it? And what's also true about yourself that maybe offsets the negative byproducts? And if it's completely false, why is it false? And maybe what is truth? So let me share an example on that. I talked before about my sister saying you break things. So when I did my evaluation in here, here's what I learned. Yes, it's true. I break things. So it is actually accurate thinking pattern. But what was inaccurate is that I was a bad thing, right? So yes, it's bad to break everything. And I did the exaggeration and I have the always type of thinking patterns associated with it. But when I went through this process, I also discovered I am a great problem solver. So the counter truth to it is, well, that might have been true that I did break things. I didn't break everything, right? So I'm dissecting this. I don't break everything, but I do break things. And this is part of my creativity and my curiosity. And it's also what makes me a strong problem solver. It helps me dive in and see how things work. And without this curiosity and this need to figure things out, I wouldn't be great at helping people. I wouldn't be great at building. I wouldn't be great at finding unique solutions to things. So now instead of thinking breaking things is a bad thing, one, I think, okay, I don't always break everything. That's just not true, right? So now I've got courage to still go out and do new things or play with things or push buttons that maybe I shouldn't be touching. But I also realize that if I do break something, it's not a big deal because I can fix it, right? And that's part of the joy in the journey is like, cool, I figured out how that works. I fix it. And now we're off to the races. And now embracing that, right? And this leads us to our next thing is what thought patterns should you be having and why? So as a result, in this example I'm using, leading into this, the correct thought pattern now is it's okay if it is broken. It's okay if things don't work out the first time because nothing's permanent. So have the courage to be creative, have the courage to be curious. Don't let that hold you back. So the next question is, what will happen when you change this thought pattern? And what will happen if you don't? Now, some of us will be motivated by the first question, and some of us will be motivated by that second question. So let me repeat them. What will happen when you change this thought pattern? So on the things of breaking things, well, what will happen is if I change this thought pattern, then I will embrace a whole new side to myself. I'll embrace strengths and attributes and talents and skills, right? So that would be the answer to that. And that can be very motivating for me, but maybe it's not. The next question, what will happen if you don't? Well, if I don't embrace this new thought pattern, then I'm going to be fearful all the time and I'm not going to step out into the unknown and I won't grow and I won't become a better version of myself. If I'm not a better version of myself, then I can't be the kind of dad my kids deserve. And I want to be the kind of dad that they deserve, the rock star dad that delivers and makes them feel good about themselves. And so maybe the answers to that motivate you, right? More so than the answer to what will happen when you change. So ask both questions and whatever motivates you the most, whatever like sinks into you, that's what you got to go with. All right, so let's wrap up. We're about done here. So I just kind of want to summarize all this, right? We all have ways of thinking that are inaccurate. That's normal. All of us, 100% of us have this. More often than not, these thinking patterns lead to unhealthy outcomes. And when entertained and allowed to occupy our mind and our mental space over time, it becomes damaging to our mental health, our relationships, probably our spiritual health as well, which then all impact our physical health and definitely our emotional health too. So we need to identify when we start to think ways that we know are not reflective of who we are, what matters most to us, and prevents us from doing the things we want to do and the way we want to do them, then we need to pay attention to what those thinking patterns are, identify them, and then identify what's triggering. When do I typically see these situations? How can I prepare for them? And then once we know them, we can understand, okay, what's really happening as a result of these things? What's the reality, right? So is any of this true? If so, what is it? If it is true, is it even bad? If it's not bad, then okay, then now I have permission to move on. If it is bad, what's the other things about me that offset this? Because I've got strengths, right? And then I help me understand like the consequences of changing or not changing, right? So I've got motivations on now I have my why on knowing the impact of this. And on the back end of this, I've got my motivations for changing. So here's my challenge to you. Take some time this week. Reflect on things you do, decisions you make, ways you see the world, and just ponder them and try to come up with one or two that you know is holding you back from becoming amazing, from becoming better, or whatever your pursuit is. And then try to figure out what those triggers are and then try to reframe so that way next time you're in that situation with those triggers, you can have an accurate thinking pattern instead of an inaccurate one. So there we go. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate those who listen to this podcast and are dedicated to the cause of making yourself better. And here's what happens when you're currently making yourself better. You are able to make the lives of other people better. You're able to serve people better. You're allowed to be a better father, a better husband, a better wife, sister, mother, brother, partner, employee, employer, boss, entrepreneur, philanthropist. So changing these mindsets, changing these inaccurate thinking patterns is going to help you be better at all of that. And it's going to free you up to tackle the things that are going to even elevate you even more. So best of luck to you. I want to hear about your successes in this. I also want to hear about your challenges. What do you need help with more on this? So anyways, thanks for tuning in. I look forward to speaking with all of you later and hearing about you from comments. Please hit me up on Facebook or LinkedIn. I want to connect with you. I want to hear from you how these podcasts are helping you out, what they mean to you. And if you want to join our Facebook group, it's called Better Me Nation. That would be awesome. Or you can follow Better Me Nation on LinkedIn. That would be really cool too. Anyways, I just want to see you. I want you to be part of this Better Nation community so we can rise the tide for all of us, because I need you for me to get better. I need to see you improving. I need the better you are in my world, the better opportunities I have, and vice versa. When I'm working on me, you have more opportunities for yourself. And so we work well together that way, and we all impact each other. So You guys are the best. I love the Better Me Nation fans. Thanks for listening in, and we will talk to you next time.